Girl rode her bike outside and vanished 12 years later. Renovators find this in a house. Cedar Brook Hollow was not the kind of town where children disappeared. Nestled deep in the evergreen embrace of the Pacific Northwest, it prided itself on quiet streets, tightly knit neighbors, and the kind of slow, sun-dappled life that moved with the rhythm of the seasons. For most of its existence, the town's greatest tragedies had involved forest fires, or the occasional bear sighting near a campsite. But everything changed on a warm summer afternoon in 2011. Laura Forrester had just come home from her morning shift at the bakery. She parked her aging Subaru in the gravel driveway at exactly 3:17 p.m. and stepped out, the scent of butter and sugar still clinging to her clothes. Her arms were full of containers, leftover pastries, her checkered apron, and a new bag of chocolate chips Emily had asked for. Her daughter had been playing outside when she left that morning, riding her pink bicycle in lazy loops along the quiet street. Emily was 8, bright-eyed and endlessly curious. She had a laugh that could melt the hardest heart and a mop of golden curls that bounced with every step. The house was quiet when Laura walked inside. At first she thought nothing of it. Emily often wandered between the front yard and the backyard, talking to herself or pretending to be a nature explorer. It wasn't until Laura called her name and received no answer that the first prickle of unease crept in. She checked the backyard. Nothing. The front lawn, empty. The neighbors hadn't seen her. By nightfall, the entire town was searching. Flashlights cut through the descending darkness as volunteers combed the woods and canvassed door to door. The local sheriff assured Laura that these things usually resolved within a few hours. But hours became days, days stretched into weeks, and then months. And Emily Forrester had vanished without a trace. The pain cracked Laura from the inside out. Her marriage crumbled under the weight of shared grief and unspoken blame. Her husband Thomas moved to Seattle 6 months later, unable to bear the echoes of their daughter's absence. Laura remained in Cedar Brook Hollow, clinging to routine, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, Emily would come home. 12 years passed. The town moved on slowly, reluctantly. The bakery continued to serve its regulars, the trees continued to grow taller, and new families moved into the aging homes. But for Laura, time had frozen. Every birthday Emily missed was a wound that refused to heal. Her bedroom became a storage room. The walls were repainted, but the closet still held a few of her favorite stuffed animals. Laura never let them go. Then, on an unremarkable May afternoon in 2023, everything changed. Laura had just finished her shift and pulled into the driveway at her usual time. As she stepped into the kitchen, her phone buzzed with a call from a number she hadn't seen in years. "Detective Dean Harland," the voice said. Laura nearly dropped the phone. Dean Harland had been the lead investigator on Emily's case. In the early days, he'd called almost daily. Over time, the updates dwindled until they stopped altogether. Laura had made peace with the silence, interpreting it as resignation. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dean paused. "We found something. Related to Emily's case. I think it's best if we speak in person." Laura's heart lodged in her throat. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Dean said. True to his word, a patrol car pulled up less than 20 minutes later. Dean looked older than she remembered, his hair peppered with gray, his shoulders heavier. He stood on the porch with a somber expression. "What is it?" Laura asked, gripping the doorframe. "A renovation crew found a child's bicycle under a concrete slab in the garage of a rental property," he said. "It matches the description of Emily's." Laura's breath left her in a whoosh. "I need you to come with me, to identify it." The drive across town felt like a dream. Laura sat beside Dean in silence, watching familiar trees blur past the window. When they turned onto Oak Ridge Lane, she stiffened. "I drive by this house every day," she murmured. Dean nodded. "The property was converted into an Airbnb a few years ago. The garage was sealed until now. The construction team was updating the plumbing when they uncovered it. The scene was cordoned off with yellow tape. Forensic specialists moved in and out of the garage. Dean led her through the chaos to a hole in the concrete. Inside, partially buried in dirt and broken cement, was a pink bicycle with a white basket. Laura fell to her knees. The plastic streamers still dangled from the handlebars, pink and purple, Emily's favorite colors. "That's hers," she whispered. "Oh my God, that's her bike." Dean crouched beside her, silent. Forensics confirmed the bike had been intentionally buried before the garage was sealed. No other remains were found, but the discovery reopened the case. Suddenly, Emily wasn't just a memory. She was a question begging for answers. "We've contacted the property manager," Dean told her. "His name is Ernest Mallory. He's been responsible for this house for over a decade. We're bringing him in for questioning." The past was waking up. Laura returned home that evening with more questions than she could bear. She opened her laptop and logged onto the Missing Children's Forum, where she had posted updates for years. She shared the discovery, not knowing it would unleash a fresh wave of horror. That night, she received a private message. Attached was a photoshopped image of Emily with a grotesque pig's head crudely pasted over her face. Below it, a video clip showed someone wrapping a pig's head in plastic with the caption, "Your daughter died like this, accept it." Laura screamed. She called Dean immediately, forwarding the message. His team began tracing the account. The next morning, Laura couldn't sleep. At 4 a.m., she drove toward the bakery, only to see a light flicker on inside the Airbnb. She stopped, then saw Ernest's white van parked beside the house. And just like that, her fight for the truth began anew. The discovery of the bicycle sent ripples through Cedar Brook Hollow. Laura stood frozen as the forensic team worked meticulously to uncover the pink frame buried under the cracked concrete garage floor. A swirl of emotion overtook her: recognition, disbelief, and grief, all surging as one. She didn't need to be told it was Emily's. The bike's distinctive basket and streamers on the handlebars confirmed it. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stood tall. This was the closest she'd come to her daughter in 12 years. Detective Harlan confirmed the identification and assured Laura the investigation would escalate immediately. The bicycle hadn't just been abandoned, it had been deliberately concealed. That fact alone transformed the case from a tragic mystery to something far more sinister. As Laura was escorted back to her home, news trucks arrived, their cameras poised like sentinels. Harlan had already issued a brief statement to local media confirming the discovery and promising updates. Laura, however, declined to speak, overwhelmed by the wave of attention. Later that evening, just as she began to process the day's events, a message pinged on her online support forum, a community for families of missing children. She had posted an update earlier, sharing a photo of the uncovered bicycle and a few cautious words of hope. But the message wasn't one of comfort. Attached was a digitally altered image, one of the old family photos she had once shared online. In this version, Emily's smiling face had been replaced with something grotesque, the snout of a pig, rendered with unsettling precision. A short video followed, showing what appeared to be a pig's head being wrapped in plastic and left in the woods, accompanied by a chilling message, "Your daughter died like this pig. Accept it." Laura recoiled in horror. Her hands shook as she called Detective Harlan and forwarded the media. He promised to get digital forensic experts involved immediately. The detective's team later confirmed that the video appeared to be digitally manipulated, likely using AI-generated imagery. Still, its intent was unmistakable, meant to terrify and dissuade. Harlan suspected the person behind it was aware of the bike's discovery and meant to intimidate Laura into silence. Restless and unable to sleep, Laura decided to drive to the bakery earlier than usual. At 4 a.m., the town was quiet, cloaked in mist. But as she passed by the now infamous Airbnb property, she noticed a light flicker in the window, then vanish. Her instincts ignited. She turned down the narrow gravel path leading to the house. There, parked beside the building, was a white utility van, not a police vehicle. She recognized it: Ernest Mallory. Moments later, she spotted him stepping out of the house with something in his arms. He moved quickly and loaded the object into the van. Laura remained in the shadows watching. Ernest glanced around nervously before disappearing back inside. When he re-emerged, Laura decided to confront him. "Ernest," she called out, stepping into view. He stiffened, caught off guard. "Laura, you shouldn't be here. Neither should you. What are you doing here at this hour?" He offered a stammered excuse that the property owner, Mr. Holloway, had asked him to retrieve documents. But something in his demeanor rang false. His eyes darted, his voice wavered. After he left, Laura called Detective Harland again. He was furious. No one is authorized to enter that house. He could be tampering with evidence. Harland advised her not to follow, but she couldn't help herself. As Ernest's van turned west onto Cedar Ridge Road, she trailed from a safe distance. The road twisted through wooded territory, sparsely lit and lined with shadows. 10 minutes later, Ernest pulled over near a trailhead. Laura parked out of sight. She saw him disappear into the trees, carrying a metal drum. Soon after, tendrils of smoke began to rise. The air filled with an acrid chemical stench. He was burning something. When he returned to the van, carrying the now empty drum, Laura snapped photos with her phone. He loaded the container and drove off again. She followed him to Whispering Pines Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac with only a handful of houses. He turned into a driveway and parked at a weathered blue home. From her hidden vantage, Laura watched him retrieve a red utility cart, something large and industrial, the kind used to transport heavy items. He rolled it into the house and returned minutes later, carrying something bulky wrapped in cloth. Whatever he was moving, it was heavy. He made multiple trips, always looking over his shoulder. Laura documented everything. Then, praying for a better signal, she called Harland again. "I think he's destroying evidence," she whispered. "He's made 3 trips already with that cart." Harland's voice was sharp. "Don't do anything. We're on our way." But Laura couldn't look away. Her mother's instinct screamed that answers were within reach, that whatever Ernest was hiding might lead her to Emily. The pursuit ended less than a mile from where Laura had seen Ernest's van disappear down Whispering Pines Lane. Police had strategically blocked off the road ahead and trailed closely behind. Ernest had little time or space to react. As his van rolled toward the intersection, it was quickly surrounded by flashing lights and uniformed officers. With guns drawn, the officers ordered Ernest to exit the vehicle. He hesitated only briefly, then stepped out slowly, hands in the air, his expression a mixture of resignation and contempt. Tom II Harland approached as Ernest was handcuffed and led to the side. "Stay right there," Harland instructed the officers as he turned toward the rear of the van. Laura, watching from a distance, clenched the steering wheel of her car. Her heart was hammering. She watched as officers opened the back of the van. What followed was a blur of movement and muffled exclamations. One officer immediately radioed for emergency medical support. An ambulance already en route arrived within minutes, sirens off, but lights flashing. Laura couldn't stay in the car any longer. She got out, walking briskly toward the scene until an officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, please stay back." Detective Harland spotted her and nodded. "Let her through," he said. Laura reached him as paramedics began unloading stretchers and preparing to remove what looked like large black body bags from the back of the van. Her breath caught. "What is it?" Harland turned to her with grave eyes. "They're alive, all 3 of them, sedated but breathing." Laura's knees buckled. Harland caught her arm gently to steady her. Paramedics carefully opened one of the bags to confirm. Inside was a young woman with dirty blonde hair and an IV drip still attached to her arm. Laura's eyes widened. "Emily," she whispered. Although her daughter had grown longer, face taller build, Laura recognized her immediately. Tears flooded her eyes as she staggered forward, barely able to process the moment. Harland called out to the paramedics, "Get them to Cedar Brook Memorial, Priority 1. As the medics loaded Emily and the 2 other women into the ambulances, Ernest's shouts echoed from the patrol car. "She was mine," he yelled. "You should have left it alone, Laura. She was gone. She belonged with me." Laura turned her face pale but fierce. "How could you do this? She was just a child." Ernest glared. "She was better off. You didn't deserve her. None of you did." Harland ordered him silenced and taken away. Laura, now beside the ambulance, climbed in without hesitation, grabbing her daughter's hand as if refusing to ever let go again. "It's me, baby. I'm here. I'm not letting go." The ambulance peeled away, sirens blaring through the still morning. Inside, Laura sat beside Emily, holding her hand tightly. The medical staff monitored her vitals, whispering reassurance. Though Emily remained unconscious, her breathing was steady. At Cedar Brook Memorial, the ER swung into full motion. Laura stayed close as doctors ran assessments. Emily was stabilized. Her condition listed as serious, but not critical. She had injuries consistent with long-term captivity, malnutrition, old fractures that had healed poorly, but she was alive. Soon after Harland arrived at the hospital, "We're analyzing everything. Ernest's van, his home, his laptop. We found the original files of the images he sent you. He tried to make it look like it came from Europe to mislead us." Laura nodded, her mind still swirling. "And the other two girls, identified as Kayla Bennett and Juliana Ramirez, both missing for over a decade." Harland added, "They were about to be sold. Ernest had ties to a trafficking ring. If you hadn't followed your gut, they'd be gone again." A nurse interrupted. "Emily's waking up." Laura rushed to her daughter's room. Emily's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on Laura's face. Recognition sparked. "Mom," her voice was raspy. Laura choked on a sob. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. I've always been here." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "I thought I'd never see you again." They clung to each other as a nurse discreetly stepped out. Outside, daylight bathed Cedar Brook Hollow in a soft glow. The town, once silent and secretive, now buzzed with news of survival and justice. Emily's recovery was cautious but steady. Monitored closely by a team of physicians and trauma specialists, she began to regain strength. The sedatives had begun to wear off, and although her body was weak, her mind remained sharp. Within 24 hours of her rescue, she was sitting up, eating small meals, and responding coherently. Laura never left her side. Emily recounted her story in pieces, first to Laura, then, at her own insistence, to Detective Harland, who recorded her statement in a private consultation room, accompanied by a hospital counselor. "I was riding my bike," she began, voice trembling. "He drove up slowly, said he had kittens, said they were in the garage." Tears streamed down Laura's cheeks. "I knew I shouldn't go," Emily continued, "but he smiled. And I trusted him. I don't know why." She described the garage unfinished, at the time a skeleton of the Airbnb property. "He had a cloth with something on it. The smell made me dizzy. That's the last thing I remember." Emily woke in darkness in a cold, sterile room. There were no windows, only faint lights. At first she screamed constantly. "I thought it was a basement," she said. Later I realized it was something deeper, something built into the ground. Over the years, 2 other girls joined her, Kayla and Juliana, each abducted under similar circumstances. Each told the same lies. "He told us the world outside was destroyed," Emily said. "That there had been a war, that our families were dead, that he saved us." Harland's pen paused. "You believed him?" "Not for long," Emily replied. "He slipped up. We found magazines, old ones but dated. Eventually we realized we'd been lied to. The girls, bonded by isolation and shared trauma, created routines. They kept track of time, whispered stories of their past lives. They refused to let go of hope. He watched us. Sometimes he was kind, sometimes terrifying." Emily looked away, but we held on to each other. "That's what kept us alive," Harland nodded. "You did more than survive, Emily. You endured." He shared what they'd learned. Ernest had kept detailed journals. In them he had outlined plans to transport the girls, now nearing adulthood, to an international buyer connected through a dark web trafficking network. He was going to sell us, Emily said flatly. Yes, and he had a window of a few days before it happened. Laura's hand tightened around her daughter's, but we stopped him. Emily gave a faint smile. You stopped him. Harland added, he used his position during the Airbnb construction phase to plant the bike his way of hiding evidence. Mr. Holloway has been cleared, but Ernest, he knew every inch of that property. He exploited it. Emily processed the information slowly. All those years. He made us think the danger was outside, but it was him all along, Laura said. That evening, Kayla and Juliana also began to regain consciousness. They were placed in adjoining rooms. Once stable, they confirmed Emily's account. Everything matched down to the manipulative tactics, the underground chamber, and the slow psychological erosion Ernest had inflicted. All three girls had suffered emotionally and physically, but they survived. The news of the rescue shook the town and the nation. Reporters swarmed Cedar Brook Hollow, but the authorities protected the girls' identities. Support poured in from all corners: trauma counselors, recovery specialists, legal advocates. But for Laura and Emily, the only thing that mattered was time to reclaim what had been stolen. That night, as Laura sat beside Emily's hospital bed, they spoke quietly. I always thought I'd forgotten your face, Emily said. But the moment I saw you, I knew. You never left my heart, Laura whispered. In the next room, Detective Harlan prepared the case file. Ernest Mallory would face a long list of charges, including kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, attempted trafficking, and psychological abuse. But the greatest triumph wasn't in the court filings. It was in the hospital rooms down the hall, where three young women took their first breaths of freedom, and in the heart of a mother who never stopped believing. In the days that followed Emily's rescue, Cedar Brook Hollow transformed from a sleepy town into the epicenter of one of the most gripping criminal investigations in recent memory. News trucks lined the streets. Reporters camped outside Cedar Brook Memorial Hospital, desperate for updates. The names Emily Forrester, Kayla Bennett, and Juliana Ramirez dominated headlines. Inside the hospital, recovery was slow but steady. Emily remained under close medical supervision. Her mental and emotional health, however, became the real priority. Laura rarely left her side, speaking softly, holding her hand, reading stories they once shared, or simply sitting in silence as Emily processed the reality of her return. The trauma wasn't limited to Emily. Kayla and Juliana, both deeply disoriented, needed more time to fully awaken. The doctors remained optimistic, but cautious, their condition stable yet fragile. Meanwhile, Thom 2 Harland and his team worked relentlessly. The information Emily provided began unlocking a cascade of leads. She recalled named snippets of conversations Ernest had while speaking to unknown men through a distorted voice on speakerphone. She described objects, routines, passwords, and places from her time in captivity. She even helped authorities identify certain phrases Ernest used, repeatedly phrases that later matched with coded entries in his digital logs. Those logs, recovered from his laptop and phone, were detailed. Ernest had kept a twisted journalistic account of his care for the girls, meticulously documenting their behavior meals, education punishments, and even fabricated psychological profiles. But it was his future plans that sent shockwaves. Ernest had been planning to move the girls overseas. Authorities uncovered encrypted communications with buyers using darknet platforms. The disturbing documents included logistical details for transport aliases, forged IDs, and digital currency exchanges. As shocking as the details were, they galvanized the international law enforcement community. With the help of Europol, Interpol, and cybercrime experts, an international task force was launched. Thom 2 Harland shared evidence with Swiss authorities, who then raided properties connected to Vance Holloway, the unwitting homeowner who had employed Ernest years ago. Holloway, devastated and cooperative, provided all records of communication and employment. He confirmed Ernest's role in overseeing construction of the Airbnb property. Ernest's suggestion to build a solid concrete garage floor had once seemed like practical advice. Now, it was evidence of concealment. The realization hit hard. Ernest had been planning this for over a decade, embedding himself into the fabric of a small community hiding in plain sight. Emily's testimony continued to prove critical. She remembered the day her bike disappeared. She remembered the smell of the garage, the cool air of the underground shelter, the false newspaper clippings Ernest showed them about a world supposedly lost to war. In every account, Emily's resolve was unwavering. "He made us believe we were alone," she told a therapist. "But even when it felt true, we never stopped believing that someone was looking for us." Laura clung to those words. She had indeed never stopped. Not a day passed without her revisiting Emily's memory, whispering into the void that someday they would be reunited. Authorities, bolstered by Emily's clarity, tracked down more online aliases used by Ernest. They found posts on underground forums, some dating back over a decade, filled with coded language and grooming advice. Ernest hadn't been just a captor, he had been part of a larger network. The investigation widened. Kayla and Juliana, once lucid enough, corroborated many of Emily's claims. They remembered vague discussions of being shipped or transferred. One of them, Kayla recalled, Ernest, becoming increasingly agitated over the last month, his rituals more erratic, his discipline more severe. Back in the hospital, the girls were moved into a secured wing, protected and counseled. Their families had been located and reunions tentative. Tearful, filled with disbelief, had begun to unfold. Emily, despite the enormity of her experience, asked to testify. "I want to be in the room," she told Harland, "when he answers for what he did." Laura held her daughter close. She supported her strength, yet feared the emotional toll, but Emily was resolute. "You saved us," Laura whispered one night, as they sat watching the sunset from the hospital window. "You never gave up," Emily replied. "That's what saved me." The court case would take months, perhaps years, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ernest faced a staggering list of charges, multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, attempted human trafficking, cybercrimes, and psychological abuse. Federal prosecutors took over the case, pushing for life without parole. Meanwhile, the world began to see Emily and the others not as victims, but as survivors. A non-profit foundation was launched in their names, dedicated to helping long-term missing persons reintegrate into society. Laura was invited to speak at advocacy events, often retelling the story not with despair, but with determination and hope. Cedar Brook Hollow slowly returned to a quieter rhythm, but nothing would ever be quite the same. The garage where Emily's bike was found had been sealed off, soon to be demolished. The Airbnb listing had been removed. Vance Holloway pledged the property would be donated to organizations working to combat child exploitation. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Emily's return, the town held a candlelight vigil. Residents, many of whom had once searched for a little girl 12 years ago, gathered to honor the endurance of hope. Emily stood before them, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. "I was gone," she said, her voice clear, "but I was never lost. Because someone, my mother, never stopped looking. And because of that, I found my way home." Laura's eyes welled with tears. The dark years had stolen so much, but the light had returned, not just to her daughter's eyes, but to her own. And that above all else was the miracle they had waited for,